Just let the folks populate that are coming in now that it's open, and we'll start. And Carl and Sarah, you should be able to share screen as well.
Let's do that after he does an introduction.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I'll put up.
Yep, we're good.
You're good. I can share that poster while we start. The way of.
I do need to share sound because we don't care, right? We don't have sound.
It's up to you.
Hmm.
None of my videos have sound.
Okay.
One of yours or two of yours do.
Yeah, but I don't think we need to.
Because we can talk over it.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right, we're going to get started. Thank you all for tuning in for the second in a series of lunchtime lectures we have this summer, sponsored by AIA New Jersey's Technology and Architectural Practice, or TAP Committee. My name is Richard Garber. I am co-chair along with Matthew Poltorek of the TAP Committee. And thanks again for those of you that tuned in last week for John Cerrone's lecture, which I thought was a terrific way to kick off this series. Today we will hear from my colleagues Carl Daubman and Sarah Koderin, who are here presenting a lecture called Practice in the Age of Intelligent Machines. I love that title. It's a riff on Manuel de Landa's book, I think, which will touch base on AI and its use in the service of design. Before giving some background on Carl and Sarah's work, I want to remind you that we will take a break next week for the holiday and be back on July 9th with my colleague Laia Mogus Soldevilla, who will be presenting a lecture titled Reviving Matter for Regenerative Architecture at Duomo Lab. Duomo Lab is a lab that she has at the University of Pennsylvania. That happens to be where I am today. And then we'll conclude our series on July 16th with Winka Doubledom, who has just been named CEO and director of the Southern California Institute of Architecture in Los Angeles. And she's a principal of Architectonics in New York. She'll join me in conversation about technology and what she refers to as earth building by way of a new park and sporting facility she's recently completed in China for the 2025 Asian Games. All of these lectures, I believe, are HSW credited, so that's important for members looking to get those elusive credits as well. Now, to introduce Sarah and Carl. Sarah is a techno-optimist who loves robots. I love that. That's a great techno-optimist. Sarah completed her Master of Architecture and PhD at the Department of Architecture at the University of Ferrara in Italy, where her doctoral research investigated robotic manufacturing for the conservation of cultural heritage. She looked at innovative methods to update design workflows with a technology-driven approach, simulating on-site robotic fabrication processes to produce customized units for the recovery of damaged buildings. Very interesting work. Her work is tied to the broader economic, technological, and social changes that affect building culture now and in the future. Sarah regularly publishes her research and serves as a reviewer for international conferences and journals. And her colleague, Carl Daubman, is the acting provost and dean and professor of the College of Architecture and Design at the Lawrence Technological University in Detroit. And you can see he's wearing a shirt that proudly states that. His teaching areas include design, digital design, robotic fabrication, construction, leadership, and multidisciplinary design. Carl's a registered architect with a record of distinguished projects inspired and driven by his interests in digital technology, manufacturing, and multidisciplinary design. Daubman began the Daub Research Center, DAUB, in 2012 as a means to focus on these preoccupations and to develop work to push the disciplinary limits of those interests. Daub is both an acronym for design, architecture, urbanism, and building, and a reference to a component to one of the oldest forms of composite construction, wattle and daub, with daub being a local clay mixed with twigs, grass, marsh, reeds, and all sorts of other stuff to bind the clay. And that's also the first four letters of his last name, by the way.
Okay.
Dav has partnered with Citizen Robotics to bring 3D printed knowledge and 3D printed houses to Detroit. And Carl has also served as the Vice President of Design and Creative Director for Blue Homes. In this capacity, he oversaw product development and project design from offices in Boston, San Francisco, and Ann Arbor, while in direct conversation with marketing, sales, engineering, and manufacturing. He's led a creative and multidisciplinary team to develop modern, green, prefabricated houses that fold for shipping across North America. He's received his Bachelor of Architecture from Roger Williams University and a Master of Science in Architectural Studies from MIT, where his concentration was in design computing. And Carl is also a fellow of the American Academy in Rome and won the Founders Prize in 2015. His research while in residence in Rome was focused on construction geometry related to the Baroque. Please welcome Sarah and Carl as they present today's lecture, Practice in the Age of Intelligent Machines.
We didn't practice who talks first, did we?
Are we sharing? I think we're.
So you can see that, right?
Yeah, looks good. Yep.
Good.
Thanks for the intro. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
You saying that or reminding me to say
I don't know. Thanks for
Sorry.
having us today.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a thank you for the invitation. It's we've enjoyed being able to talk to practicing architects, and so it's always nice to be able to connect with AIA and share some of the things that we're doing and talking about some case studies about using generative AI in different ways. Some of these come from school, some of them come from a couple of projects we've been doing, and so it's nice to share that and I don't know, also learn from what your questions and concerns are. I think we've made a kind of assumption that some people joining may not have used these tools yet, and so we want to kind of give an overview and then talk about some of these examples.
This is us. Okay.
That's us, but our email addresses are there too. We're happy to continue the conversations in different ways, one-on-one. We've also been been invited by different offices to come and share some of this work and start some of those conversations as educators. It's really exciting for us to be able to have those almost as kind of focus groups, because we don't want to be educating future students in a way that may not align with the direction that the profession's heading. And so it's useful for us to be connected this way. Let me keep going. So this is a new slide too, which is why Sarah's looking at me. I wanted to share maybe an underlying assumption, and we'll use the examples as a way to talk about this or interrogate some of these things. And if we have a shared assumption that maybe traditional design and the way that most of us were probably educated is that early design, we start with a diversity of ideas, and we explore, a large number of them. And then through the design process, we kind of whittle that down, and we take one project and we kind of expand it, and it gets better and better. I think one of the things that we're seeing with students, or certainly in, say, a design studio in school, is that the old model is that you might have one or two variations, maybe three at most, up to a certain point, but the student can only sustain kind of expansion of those ideas to a certain point. Maybe one of the things that we're going to talk about is AI brings a couple of things for us. One is that there can be a greater complexity. There's certainly an efficiency and an ease with producing certain types of work. And so what we're kind of advocating for with the diagram on the bottom is that as the design process continues, we think, and this is the underlying assumption, we think that more iterations and being able to do more iterations faster will produce better work, right? And in a pre-AI period, that meant a kind of small number of variations later on. And so what we're maybe suggesting here is that we can continue to design longer, and that would produce a better final product. We can continue to explore additional ideas longer, and that would produce better work.
And we'll share. We just wanted to share a little bit of ourselves, the work that we are conducting. As was mentioned in the intro, I'm interested in thinking about the kind of connection between technology and culture. And like, as I studied kind of like new methods and tools for restoration, I started using AI early on to kind of envision some of these scenarios, to think about opportunities to kind of human machine occupancy in spaces of work. And lately, I've been exploring AI in education, in different kind of courses, so studios, seminars, and labs. And I'll talk about some of those things, some of the workflows that have been developed, and how they can be useful for a number of the tasks within the design process.
And maybe at a kind of very high level, we believe that any tool, but we're also going to talk about how AI is not necessarily a tool, but any tool can be deployed in different ways. So I think what Sarah was just sharing in her images is that she's been interested in a kind of cultural context and history and been able to leverage generative AI toward that. The images that are on the screen now is a kind of long format project that I've been working on, Richard, which is another reference to Manuel Delanda's book, but an Instagram account called Robot Historian, where there's a long format story that's being told on a daily basis over a couple of years. And so I've been tracking changes in generative AI in terms of the quality of images, but also thinking about it with a consistency of storytelling. And so you can go to the next one. I think we see these tools as quite adaptable to the designer's agenda, and that it's open to that. Because from an outside, you might say, well, all generative AI work looks the same. But I think we have a couple of examples too. Like if you use AI in a lazy way, it will produce lazy work. If you leverage it in a different way, we think you can do amazing things with it. It's been, the anxiety around AI is because of the speed with which it's come upon us. And so this is just looking at the change or how quickly that's come up to speed. And I always say that from a policy perspective in higher education, we did not have to create a policy around Instagram. We did not have to create a policy around TikTok, but when it came to intellectual property within the university, we did find ourselves having to craft an AI policy. And so this is, as firms grapple with what does this mean for how we work, it's happened quickly. And so there is a reason for the anxiety that we all feel from this. And maybe this was something that I saw at the National AIA conference, if others were there. But the speed to development, and what's pretty astounding is just that benchmark of 100% is human performance. And so we're seeing things go from not even close to that to exceeding that in a very short amount of time. And so this is a technology that we really have to take seriously in a number of broader ethical ways. And we also know that we've been inundated with many, many different types of tools. Every app, every software has some type of plugin or some type of something that has an AI component to that. So I think it's useful for all of us to kind of understand what role that might play. And this is, you want me to just keep going on the early slides? Or?
Yeah. I have a sequence later on.
Okay. This was a great article that I read actually a week or two ago. And Jules White is someone that we had come and speak at LTU. And in this most recent work, the provocation, which I think is a really brilliant one, is that AI is not a tool. It should be considered a form of labor. And the case that's being made is that it will change business models. And it's more of the article suggests a care for your organization, and that people are trained and understand these things, and you give them the freedom to do this. And if that works, this will be a really impactful tool. And so I think we'll keep that in mind just in terms of how we think about, we'll probably default to saying that it's a tool, but I think to open that up, there's many more opportunities. We also talk about it, I think as academics, we're going to share references so that you can learn more. This book predates the kind of advent of everyone doing generative AI, but a really wonderful provocation in that actually, rather than saying artificial intelligence, we should be talking about collaborative intelligence. And that's back to the previous article, and that it's a form of labor. And so what role do humans play, and what role does the AI play in this, and how do we bring the best of both together? We've seen a kind of quick change, right? Just thinking about the CAD or computer-aided design. What's been amazing is just the transformation. I've been talking a lot about lately about the keyboard and what is a very antiquated form of input. Now we can go from voice to text within a prompt and produce an image very quickly. And what you see on the right-hand side is a completely synthetic generative AI environment, but being able to immerse yourself in that and think about that. So how we might interact with clients, how we might work with them. The next example is just even taking well, maybe even back to that underlying assumption that we had. This is just taking a doodle and looking at a whole bunch of variations. So take that sketch and make a couple of prompts related to a materiality or to a setting or to a season or to a time of day, and being able to look at those in a very, very quick time span and take something that's very abstract. And I think we all struggle with our clients maybe not understanding or not seeing what we see in a sketch, and being able to translate that sketch into what looks like a built project very quickly. And we see that there.
Because we don't.
Okay. And what we see here, I think you may already be using some of these tools already. And so what we see, and I have to assume many people that are joining today have spent hours in Photoshop or cutting people out or cutting trees out or doing these other types of things. And so that type of one click results in one transformation on the screen is very different now, where we can give something a text prompt and something will change, or we can expand beyond the margins of an image that's been created and begin to work this way. And so how do we start to lay in entourage and people and occupation and patina and all of these other types of things within a project is a very different thing now. And so this is just at a very low level using Photoshop. And maybe the last bit for me.
Keep going.
Keep
You're
going.
doing great.
So we just talk about as well, maybe back to those assumptions, that the top row of images, the cartoon, I'd say that the design process traditionally felt like we start with something that's very abstract, the smiley face, and we move into the direction here, right to left, to becoming incredibly specific. The change that we're seeing in design, this change that we're seeing in education, is that students can have almost a kind of immediacy to go to something that's incredibly specific. And so it felt like in my own education, kind of holding that off for what may have felt like years, to the point where I could represent an idea. Now, if a student is articulate and understands how to use these tools, they can show us something that has never been imagined before, to a very high level of fidelity.
That's your favorite, then I'll go.
And as it relates to that, right, just thinking about this transformation, on the far left is Mises' photo collage. And imagine, taking a photograph of a model, cutting that out, superimposing that on another photograph, how much time that takes to do that. These images that we see to the right of that, we'll talk more about the course, but we take students to Rome for a week, students who have never used these tools, and they start to speculate on different types of opportunities. And so what we're trying to think about it as those kind of opportunities of the collage, about putting two unlike things together, but we really lose those kind of edges that were done when we were collaging things by hand. Now it's at the level of the pixel, and these pixels are being kind of managed and brought together and synthesized in a very quick period of time.
And so we didn't mention the tools, but in our experimentation, in our research, and in our studios, We are exploring mainly large language models, image generation, video generation, and 3D workflows. This is an example of one of our favorite image generation platforms, which is Midjourney, that works on Discord or on the browser with some latest developments. And here, we have been tracking, right, the development of the quality of the images that Midjourney can generate using a text prompt or an image prompt as a primary input. And you kind of can see the development over the past couple of years, actually after the release in 2022, using the same prompt, very simple, architectural rendering, blobby, translucent form, how the quality improved. So we've been talking about sketches as like having like a kind of immediate response to a text prompt through an image. And then even if the quality is changing, even like the very high resolution images, we still need to recognize them as sketches, as kind of like early stage idea that are not necessarily situated in any context unless we create it around it.
And we have to update that now because Midjourney also just came out with video.
Yeah.
So you can do all of these things and now it becomes dynamic.
Right. And we're interested again, like in thinking about the speed of like these kind of operations of creating visual content, but at the same time, like trying to define a method to explore these tools that are evolving so quickly every day. So, and even like thinking about how does a prompt work, right? Like especially in early, like in 2022, when Midjourney was released, trying to understand how to control the process, how to kind of like focus on keywords and assemble them in a specific order, kind of like weighting the important parts of the text and being able really to give a hierarchy of information to the tool to be able to process, right? Information starting from a description of a situation, kind of adding kind of details and atmospheres. And what we have been talking about is going back to the concept of like process development and being able to start from a simple idea, conceptual idea, and then kind of like moving forward toward the more realistic explorations. With AI, we kind of confront material sooner in the process. So it's not necessarily something that we get to decide after, like the geometry is in place or the idea is in place, but it's actually like a continuous back and forth, right? Because every time we see a visual, we kind of respond to that in different ways, even thinking about the atmospheres that we are creating.
That's the same
with the
prompt and
generation.
it's 50 images created in a short period of time.
Right.
So
there was much more also like in terms of early on, like the specific parameters with like what type of Midjourney version we want to use, what kind of style. S50 is kind of a parameter that we can set to decide how much we want the algorithm to be opinionated or how much there's more like open interpretation of the input prompt. So there's so much that gets into that, but trying to sum it up. And to think about the fact that, again, we generate a lot of information very quickly. How do we control that? How do we curate the process to select what's best to proceed with our design intentions? And even like starting to map those diagrams to understand what Midjourney can do for us, right? Like once we generate an image, we can upscale it, we can create variations, we can mix up the outcomes. And so that becomes kind of like an iterative generative process.
And the importance, I'd say, is that we still have authorship in that process. I think we're moving away from the one click equals one input in the model, but we're still guiding that model and moving in different ways based on our preferences.
You like that?
Well, just as an example, like I had a colleague once say that, and someone that was very pessimistic about AI, who said it was a incredible plagiarism machine. And I took that as a kind of amazing compliment or an amazing challenge, right? What if we talk about precedent with students? And what if we even bring back some notion of an understanding about history, an understanding about visual literacy for our students to be able to use these tools, but mine other types of data sets or mine other types of knowledge that they might have.
And Copyright is an important topic. Authorship is always kind of like a recurring theme when we talk about these technologies. And for this reason, we're focusing a lot in trying to understand Stable Diffusion as the open access platform that has a number of interfaces, including ComfUI, that is what you're seeing here on this slide, that has a high level of customization in the sense that you can decide what are the trained data sets that you want to use. You can use your own material, you can use your own sketches to train the way it develops, visuals based on the existing content that you want to start with. And we're seeing firms really taking from their own database of information and using that to train their own AI systems. And again, like have as an accelerator and multiplier of results during the design processes.
And some might suggest that if you are mining previous work, you may not be producing new work, but this is also Stable Diffusion, which allows you to maintain a kind of structure of an image. So we can see the Mies collage on the left, and then an idea that this is a high-tech lobby for an interior tech firm or something like that. So it's using that same underlying structure and then starting to produce something new. This is just an example of at a very early stage in a design process, taking almost a screenshot of a Rhino model and being able to drop that into Stable Diffusion and look at 20, 30, 50 variations of different types of materials. We talked about also being able to bring video to this. And so all of these examples are taking a generated AI static image and then giving that image and then giving a kind of prompt about how the camera is moving through the space.
And we're using this as a way to think about like new formats, new media to express architectural ideas, because now we have the possibilities of creating animated dynamic drawings and videos to generate kind of more like an atmospheric kind of point of view within our like spatial ideas. And so that's kind of an ongoing conversation and trying to understand how to embrace these possibilities.
And for a long time, this was all, or for let's say 2 years ago, we were only talking about two-dimensional flat images. But when you can start to make video, now you have something that it's still two-dimensional, but it's in 3D space. And so Sarah's been doing work about that translation from 2D to 3D.
Yeah, and you made me think about even like the whole conversation around digital fabrication and how kind of like compresses the space between design and making and like re-questions the static drawing. So like, how do we just keep this going as a type of conversation? This was a very early on study when the first open access depth maps generators were available to kind of try to respond to the promise of generating a space out of a, two-dimensional visual image AI generated. And now there's so much advancement using ComfUI, Stable Diffusion in the ComfUI interface. We can use a single view or multi-view inputs to kind of like take a static image and translate that into a high resolution 3D model. And then we haven't talked about that, but now also Midjourney has a number of options that allow you to keep kind of the structure of an image and kind of change certain aspects of that. So it became very handy to kind of use a very simple screenshot from Rhino in an Arctic view and then use the retexturing method. And so like this allows us again to go back and forth between 2D and 3D and even like reinsert outcomes back into the loop and start to use this method to generate visions like this. Another workflow that we found interesting was the possibility of using using Gaussian splatting, which is a method they use AI basically to take a video, to turn that video, to understand that video, to turn that into a point cloud and then kind of meshify the cloud, right? So it's like from the video to the 3D model. And that's something that you can do even with your phone, taking a video of an object and then going through this process just for like quick data collection and iterations. So we mentioned that we're trying to use these tools in studio context, trying to understand, how to kind of operate in different ways, even in a 3D model. That's also a process that comes from one of my studios in which We use an existing model, we retextured that, and then sliced it, and then we made a 3D model of that kind of like smaller component. So as a way to creating like new ways of studying, in a way, the ideas.
And we've been talking about image generation, both through Midjourney, which we showed first, and Stable Diffusion. Now we also want to talk a little bit about chatbot. And for me, the beginning, it felt like chatbot was for, if I had to write something, if I had to do something else. But been using more and more chatbots to develop almost a kind of 500-word short story. And then that becomes my prompt. And then if there's something that I want to change, I'll just ask the chatbot to tweak that. And so this is, the slide talking about chatbot prompting is really ultimately what's now being called vibe coding, where you don't have to understand every single character that's as part of a code, but that you can say, well, make it do this instead. Okay. And the code is something that exists in the background. And so Sarah's been starting to leverage chatbots more around these types of design issues as well.
Yeah, and creating personas when conducting a studio. Just thinking that like the creation of persona is more kind of like an attitude that belongs to industrial design. So try and think more about like people we could interact with, and not necessarily only as clients, but also like the users of, whatever space we're designing. So trying to create chatbots and keep training them during the semester as personas that have a background, they have a history, they have like certain family configuration, and also trying to create chatbots that cover kind of like a spectrum of ages, right? So that the students during the design process could always kind of interact with different kind of personas, and so try to understand a different point of view of a kid or like an elderly person, kind of that would
And in
access the
that case,
space they were
the
designing.
video project was a housing project, which was multi-generational. And so getting the students to be able to interact with the chatbots as a way to almost simulate the interactions with a client.
Yeah, and it was not necessarily that they would kind of like do what the chatbots asked for, but it's really more a way of kind of integrating ideas and even receiving feedback that you wouldn't think about, right? Like the quality of the space, the size of things, the accessibility, and those aspects that you kind of want to keep recurring like into the conversation, coming back into the conversation during the process. And the knowledge of the chatbots kept growing over time. So that was also another compelling aspect of this process. Just a few things also at the college, we teach a robotic fabrication class, digital fabrication class, and we found like we really wanted to try large language models in many ways possible. And one of them is really trying to interrogate it to understand the kind of the logic of parametric design and how to put in sequence the operations of like software programs like Grasshopper, and doing that with that kind of instruction. Another way of engaging with ChatGPT was to use it for coding. We found out that it's a great tool that kind of understands instruction on how to generate three-dimensional geometries and how to kind of break them down into target points. So all of this means that that's how we program a robot through this process. And so going directly from ChatGPT to target points that a robot can read. And so here you see kind of like documenting this process with long exposure photos. So there's other aspects of like thinking about how we can like generate different kind of inputs for AI. This is an instance in which in the robotic fabrication class, we created some models, like simple forms using a hot wire cutting process, and like documenting those models and then using them as the baseline, right, to generate a spatial rendering in the same way that Carl showed before with the kind of screenshot of a project in Rhino. Kind of same thing, but like starting from materiality this time. And then again, thinking about how to represent these things, like what kind of outcomes do we want. And so very simple, we call them proto-architectural models, documented at 360, and then generating an image for each frame, right? So you have kind of that kind of multiplicity of outcomes shown here to an animated.
And before she goes on to the next thing, I'm always the one that says it, is that class that goes from learning how to use an industrial robot or a CNC or a 3D printer, you starting to incorporate AI, taking that very simple what you see on the left here, a robotically hot wire cut foam model to produce those images on the right. These are sophomore architecture, interior design, and industrial design students. And so at the sophomore level, these are we're really introducing these tools to the students at that stage. And so as you know, many of you are hiring recent graduates, they should be coming out of school with these capabilities.
So we tested some ideas in a studio this past spring, thinking about the possible reuse of a beautiful building downtown Detroit. And I see already a comment in the chat. I know you're gonna see many curvilinear things and kind of objects that have this aesthetic, but at the same time, like one of the reasons is that we challenge students to kind of use AI at their own advantage and trying to create forms that would be very hard or like time consuming to create through 3D modeling and texturing. So that's kind of like part of this process again of making animated drawings. And the laptop is not connected to power, so we should do that too. And continuing with this approach of always trying to imply that every kind of like step of evolution of the project actually embeds a multiplicity of ideas. And the other aspect of that is that we mentioned that in natively AI is not situated, so it's really part of our creative process to create context for it, and also an aspect that it gives us like a specific vision, not necessarily like overall even like tectonic context. So try to understand how to transfer visual qualities from a section to a floor plan and work in this way with like fragments of ideas and combining them together. That becomes also like part of, you know, that kind of discussion, overarching discussion.
The other thing is that we felt that, well, Sarah and I have been teaching a class where we take a group of students to Rome each spring for 1 week. And so it's the first year we did it was the traditional sketchbook. And that was 2022. We started seeing generative AI things happening. And so the next year we went back, we ditched the traditional sketchbook idea and the students started sampling the city. And so on their cell phone, they were taking pictures, they were prompting directly on their phone, and they were producing new images and speculations about the city. And so what we see is Piazza Navona on the left, the traditional sketch. On the right, a student speculating about an annual festival where the furniture gets pulled out of the houses and they screen movies in the piazza. And so just that level of maybe thinking about atmosphere, thinking about quality of space, and just the fidelity of the idea is something that we've seen really quickly translate and change. An example here of a student, you know, thinking educationally, where we introduce an idea. Here, the student is situated in the museum, looking at a Bernini sculpture, taking a picture of the Bernini sculpture, and then starting to prompt over the top of that, and imagining that Bernini had sculpted a sculpture of the she-wolf, which is the icon for Rome. It also allowed us to collaborate with the students and basically look over their shoulder. And so we share a collaborative platform within Discord, and we can see what the students are prompting. We can see what they're upscaling and what they're making variations of, and we can have a role in that. And so we'd recommend this as a really amazing tool among a design team to share ideas and be able to bounce things off of one another and even like create variations off of one another's work. And like we said, if you prompt in a lazy way, you get a lazy thing. And so Sarah is Italian, as the bio said. And so what we started doing was asking them to prompt something about Rome before we went to Rome. And that's what you see on the left. You get the kind of very banal, very like obvious ideas about the Colosseum. But then after a week in Rome, where the students are using this tool to really think about what they're seeing and feeling and experiencing, we start to get images like what we see on the right, where they understand the umbrella trees and they're thinking about the time of the day and the particular materials that are there as part of the city.
an infrastructure collapsing with monumental architecture, and thinking about these as ways of generating stories as well. So a rendering is not anymore like a high fidelity representation of architecture or spatial idea, but like this tells the story of like imagining Rome's fountains overflowing at night to clean the streets, or thinking about like merging like, worlds collapsing, like classical architecture with rationalist architecture, and trying to create those scenarios. So kind of like the fencing academy reinterpreted, and more atmospheric ideas. So like thinking more about the colors, how it felt to be in Rome, and again, bringing context into the conversation.
Some of those things are more abstract, sometimes they're not. This one's static, right? And so this was something that we had looked at for the campus and as part of the campus plan, a kind of student atrium space, using stable diffusion to talk to investors or board of trustees. And it's just like, what could that space be? And so really, like Sarah said, imagining these as kind of sketches for existing buildings, existing projects on campus, and very, very quickly, with no support, right? Just like one of us doing this quickly, starting to think about some of these things. So this kind of translation, or as we think about practice, leveraging these types of tools to kind of accelerate aspects of what we do.
I think that's one of the videos. Try click that. We just wanted to mention the fact that now in most of our studios that include AI, we almost all the time generate videos, because that's really a way of like start to think about the human experience in the spaces that we're creating, try to create to a certain extent like a three-dimensionality to the visions that we are obtaining by using AI. And so that's one of the, like we included a few videos of some of the processes that we have developed recently. This is an example of the adaptive reuse of an abandoned warehouse as an outcome of a AI workshop. More of this, another kind of like kind of sequence of visions on how the space could be experienced. So again, like as Carl mentioned, like the user experience changed and like improved over time in the past couple of years, and now it's getting more and more accessible, really, to be able to produce these outcomes in a very short amount of time. And at the end of the day, using prompting as kind of like the main vehicle to be able to generate these kind of visions. I have another one that's kind of a longer video, but kind of gives you a sense of how like we can really use this as a tool to focus on the human experience when we kind of like develop in general design ideas.
And so we've been sharing some of these things. This was from an exhibition that was at Pratt this past January, pulling together a number of different designers sharing their work. And so it's almost full circle for us. Some of Sarah's work on the cultural context and robotics, and my own work with the Robot Historian project. But then we've also been doing some of our own. This was an exhibition that we did last fall, where we both kind of built quickly this exhibition space and curated a number of images that we got from designers from all over the world. And I see, there's one question that's been asked about structural design and other types of things. These things are evolving quickly. And so where we start a couple of years ago where it's only images, now we're moving to three-dimensionality. This was an example for us. What we show from the exhibition is taking our digital model and using a site print robot from HP to basically print our floor plan on the floor, so that when we installed our exhibition, it was in the right place. And so we're looking at expanding these tools from these types of devices, of translating drawings into things on site. Sarah and I started a company called Plop, which we are looking at 3D concrete printing. And then Sarah's work with robotics as well.
We never made drawings for that pavilion. That's the other funny
for this project, yeah, we didn't actually produce any drawings. It went directly from, and when we've been talking for years about file to factory, we went directly from the design to the CNC, and then put it on site. Short time, low cost for things at school. We've been developing kind of AI advisory boards, focus groups with practices to understand how they're thinking about these tools. There was also a question about copyright within that, how we start to navigate some of these things, how we think these tools evolve, and maybe what inherent biases there are. There's certainly energy concerns. There's other types of things. We're coming at this one as a way of hopefully demystifying the tools. I think that it's beneficial to be using these things rather than kind of sitting on the sidelines and watching the development from afar. And there's a kind of low barrier to entry to be able to work with these things and play with these tools. And so we've been interested in working with practices in our region, talking about these things, helping them navigate some of it and understand some of the opportunities for it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That's it.
And that's our talk.
That's it for the slides. Our contact information was there. We love having these conversations and would love to continue the conversations.
That's great. That's great. So thank you both for that. And there are some questions in the Q&A, and Carl, you alluded to one or two of them already, but maybe as a way to sort of open it up a little bit, we have a few minutes here. How would you advise that? I mean, I'm guessing that many of the people that have tuned in, and it looks like there's about 78 people, almost 80 people that are tuned in here,
Well,
are interested in this technology. How would you advise that they start a kind of integration in their work? And I would say the majority of these folks are coming from practice, right? So how do you take a body of work, if you've developed a body of work in practice, or you have some ideas about what you do, let's say, how can you bring some of these tools, whether they're text to image or other tools, into, let's say, a kind of design workflow?
I can chip in.
chip in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say from my own experience, probably starting to play with these tools a couple of years ago, is they evolve quickly. And so my suggestion would be to start using them, because I think the skills that I developed in terms of prompting, the tools have gotten easier to use, but the underlying concepts of the way that you might engage the tool or really the labor of AI feels consistent as well. And so I would say start incorporating. I've talked to firms who are using, oh, we use ChatGPT for our marketing materials or for those types of things. I would try and find ways to connect different areas in practice. I know there was a question about structural design. There are some very early tools. So the reason why it happens too, think about what the internet is. It's words and it's images. So the largest data sets that we have to work with, and why these tools advanced as quickly as they did, is because of the large images or large group of images on the internet, or all of the text on the internet. Geometry or structural design, these things are going to come much later, because one, we often don't share that data between firms. We keep that internalized. And so the name of the game with all of these technologies is that the bigger the data set, the better training it has behind it, the more knowledge you have to leverage with that. And so I think we're starting to see some of those other things like code analysis. We'll start to see other types of three-dimensional geometry analysis. Those things are coming and there's people working on them, but they're not nearly as developed as the image generation or the large language models that we've seen to date.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking about literacy because, again, things are going so fast that you kind of want to detect what's going on, and you want to recognize when, an image is AI generated or a text is AI generated. And we've been talking, like, we are happy to see that all our former students that are now working in offices are kind of like, they are used as a reference point, like to understand AI or kind of initiate AI conversations in the office, right? Because they're taking that expertise from the studios and try to kind of apply that in the real world. And you know, like we hear stories of like clients coming with an AI image saying we want this, right? So how do you kind of like react to that? How do you explain those things? How can you kind of contextualize this in the way that we're using this imagery as a mood board, or as a sketch, right? Like the big idea of like that's not the end product. That's a very early part of the conversation. So again, right now I think we have been focusing a lot on the what to do with those visuals and try and push towards the kind of the promise of like being able to go directly from AI to fabrication, and that entails like all those discussions around structure and, you know,
Right.
materiality.
I mean, maybe and as a way to get into it, Ricardo Soros just asked a kind of a good question, a very specific question about design layouts. So maybe before we get into that, so like when the students, let's say they used Chat GPT or Stable Diffusion to generate an image, and this is happening everywhere, right? I mean, it's happening here at Penn as well, where I am today, right? But I think one of the questions, and I think this would be a pertinent question for practitioners as well, is let's say you are not lazy. Let's say you do the work to put in all of the kind of prompts that you need to generate an image that is very usable to you of a building or a landscape or something like that, right? How do you then, at that point, it still becomes a kind of image translation, right? And I think that that's something that, if I'm reading a little bit into some of the questions that we're seeing here, you know, is something that I still think is to your point, Carl, evolving a little bit, right? And so to be more specific, Ricardo asks, as an example, is there a way to share plans or images of a kitchen layout and ask ChatGPT or other AI software, chat preferred, he seems like a chat user, for better or more efficient layouts, perhaps a layout that we have come up with, but to see if there is something more efficient or better. So he's saying, can the AI actually kind of check assumptions for efficiency, right?
Yeah, getting there. I mean, it really depends. There are some standalone tools that allow you to do that. Right now, ChatGPT does a little bit of that, but this is part of the ecosystem that is evolving, and probably even thinking about standalone tools, right? Like being able to kind of like set certain parameters that are strict and see how to optimize in different ways. Because optimization, it's not necessarily like a individual response to whatever the design need is. But I think we're getting there,
Yeah.
honestly.
And maybe for some of these, like if we come back to thinking about how we design an organization or how we design our firm, for me, what was pretty amazing is that, you know, having done so much high-end kind of digital design, I always needed a high-end, you know, desktop computer to do that. And all of a sudden, I was able to make what I thought were really compelling images or like renderings, what we would have assumed to be renderings on my phone or on my iPad. And
Yeah.
so all of a sudden, right, imagining a trajectory of a firm principal who loves design, but doesn't get to design because, you know, the youngest people in the office get to do that. And so I think this tool is almost like a re-democratization of some of the skills that I think we love. I was, you know, thinking back to times where I spent days trying to get like the light in a particular way in a rendering and being able to do that very quickly and get, oh, what is it patina like? How does this weather? I was able to start visually articulating aspects that had up until that point been very, very difficult to accomplish. And so like something like a mood board or something like describing visual qualities to someone, like we should no longer be pulling images from the internet for those things. We can construct those on our own now. And so it produces a kind of rich discussion. And again, I know we're very like image focused because I think that's where the tools have existed the longest around these things. And we're seeing other things kind of come with that. But I think in terms of like, I'm looking at like Thomas's question about where are the best needs. I would say what the other thing that we're seeing is that these tools, for a very long time, as designers, we've always relied on the software that's given to us, developed from aerospace, developed in another industry, and then it trickles down to us. Being able to use AI to customize our own workflows, customize the way that we work. And so I would say to Thomas's question, like if you're interested in reducing labor and cost, then I think this is certainly a tool that can do that. If you're interested in doing something else, you can leverage the tool to do that. And so I think what we've seen is a I keep saying tool. I said we would default to saying tool, but a kind of technology that allows us to inform how it's going to be used. And I think there's a lot of creativity that comes with that and a lot of amazing opportunities that come with that.
So, and as you see, we're now starting to get some questions in. But before we move down beyond Thomas, and Thomas, thank you for that. I just want to go back to Christian Kellogg, who wrote. He was prompting during your talk.
Yeah.
And you got to answer this one, guys. The forms and surfaces seem to be mostly organic, cave-like brutalist. Why this?
I will say, like, I'll speak to the brutalist. I think Sarah's the cave part. The brutalist part for me was one, like, there's an image that I often show that I come back to was from my own education, being educated that buildings existed a certain way. And it was, I think, even after I had graduated from undergrad, seeing Villa Savoy in ruins was a really kind of shock to me that the something that we had seen as a photograph had had a different life. It had fallen in disrepair. And so again, that aspect of like things that are weathering, things, a kind of industrial aesthetic that have patinaed over time. I've been very interested through the Robot Historian Project to talk about almost a kind of evolution or a kind of ecological historical aspect to those things and start to portray architecture in a way that has a kind of long life to it, and that's why it changes. And so I think that's why a lot of that imagery is there.
I'll
The
be more
cave life.
pragmatic with my response. I mean, there are reasons I'm interested in exploring that kind of aesthetics, but at the same time, so LTU is a school that produces architects. Like our students are very excited about practice. They want to be done with school and start practicing and be licensed as soon as possible.
Pragmatic.
And they're very pragmatic and they are Revit champions. But sometimes it's very hard to develop conceptual ideas with them. So it's really try and push hard to get them to use AI to do something that Revit is not able to do within the framework of a semester. So that's a component of the reason why I'm pushing, trying to do cave-like or kind of difficult textures, and even encouraging students to create their own textures using Midjourney so that they kind of like starting from the very like base elements that they need to generate the visuals, and everything is like natively AI generated, like textures, for instance. Like I agree, like the component of like we don't waste or like employ time anymore to do renderings because it's so fast, right? And then you can assemble them and you can make iterations. So like that's it's out of the conversation. Like we focus on other things now, which I appreciate that.
Yeah, we're curious what those other things are. Like, yeah, you're picking up on some things that we've maybe pushed or advanced, but I think there's we kind of pose it to all of you is like, what are the things that you care about? What are the things that you're curious about? You can use these technologies to explore that maybe more than you've been able to in the past.
Yeah. All right, and moving on. So Ahmed, I think your question has sort of been answered, and if not, please type back if there's anything more specific, just in the interest of time. But I do want to go to Alice Sungs, which I think is a great question that we haven't talked about. Do you have any idea how much energy is used in these AI explorations, and are you concerned with the consumption when scaled?
Yes.
Yeah, we don't have the metric. Oh, actually, no, it's not the first time that we get this question, and we should start including some of that in the slides. I don't have the metric now on like how much, like a unit for consumption. It is concerning. With the hope that, you know, like some of all these kind of wide exploration at some point will be like narrowed down and focused. The thing is like now it's kind of even like when you do a Google search, like AI is automatically engaged. So there's like a very big scale of utilization of AI, and it has a huge impact on the environment, right? So like usually like like in our practice, we are concerned about, we say that the building industry like accounts for 40% of the overall global consumption. Now, like, AIs, and that's the reason why I'm interested in restoration, which is like a field off within conservation, like to think about like we shouldn't build anymore, right? But now, like this kind of technology at this moment it can be undone. So we need to face that and try to address it. Now, like we're developing things mostly from the standpoint of users. And again, kind of understand this technology because we don't want to be left out in the conversation. But of course, it's concerning, and we'll keep tracking those things and to understand them at the global scale.
And we're not developing the technologies. We come about that we're kind of approaching this that we're users, and probably in a lot of ways like we've always been, that we always get handed software. Software always has kind of embedded biases within it, and how do we hack it or tweak it? I think from an energy perspective, I think Sarah's right. It's not going to go away. Our hope is certainly over time that it becomes more efficient, or those things start to be kind of managed, controlled, and maybe designed in different ways to allow it to be more energy efficient. And I think it's important for all of us to be mindful of that, at least.
Yeah. Great. Okay, we have one more from Frank Collada, which I think I will go back to some of Ahmed Khan's concerns, which is, when tackling a detailed project, specifications and technical design challenges, what do you do? And so Frank asks very specifically, and you may talk about the impediments of this, guys. Have you used AI to draft construction detail drawings? Right? Is it like the push the button and you're done with the CD set? Now,
No.
let me just say something about that actually, because I was taking some notes. Like, when you were, and this goes back to an early point that you both made about, if you work lazy, you're going to get lazy work, right? And it struck me that there's this kind of, there could be perceived drawbacks with Carl, your quote, the instantaneous level of fidelity in terms of potential architect-client relationships, right? And so one of those, just thinking out loud, is, if this really becomes so easy, there's this kind of question that I can see, if you're done, what am I paying you for, or something like that, right? So that's one thing that we might discuss in the last couple of minutes we have here. And then on the other side of it, and this also really depends on the client, and I'm sure many of the members have had these experiences with a client that really wants to be involved in something, right? That wants to go through iterations with the architectural team along the way. If the iterations are minimized or are all, kind of prescribed within some kind of AI model that's developed, what kind of input or what kind of interaction does then the architect have with the client, right? So I think that those are kind of valid questions that we may end up thinking about.
Yeah, certainly there's the issue. It's not the push of a button. And
Yeah,
I'll
of course.
say that I've kind of enjoyed that imagining that, yes, we can generate 100 images that are incredibly rich and situated and all of these types of things, that in the end, we still have to translate something three-dimensionally. We have to translate it to the code. I think that is starting to change. I think we're seeing some specification software related to AI where maybe there's this urban legend, but that like, the very experienced person in the office, call him Bob, right, is retiring. All that institutional knowledge leaves, all the RFIs that he's ever generated, all the specifications that he wrote, to basically capture all of that and have a chat bot in the office so you can still ask Bob that type of thing. I think it has to do a lot with how we capture some of this data and how we start to train. And so back to the one book that we showed is like the human's job is to kind of train these things and sustain the data set. And then we can then leverage the AI tool around some of these things. And so, yeah, it is going to be a huge shift. I think in the way that we practice, it is going to be a shift. And in what I can also already imagine, it's like Pinterest on steroids. That imagine your client comes to you with all of these images, with 200 AI images about what they want their project to be, right? And like, how do we work through that? How do we understand those things? I think we're all grappling with that now.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's great. I think we're also out of time now. We did get a couple of other questions. So Ricardo, we've spoken about your questions a little bit before. You can email us all, and please email Sarah and Carl and reach out with specific
Yeah,
questions you
please.
might have about integration. I think they'd be able to help. And then we got a late one. Herbert Feuerstein wrote, in managing client expectations, the subjectivity of the image often creates the expectations of an instant building. How do you deal with that? So that goes back to that thing that we were just kind of talking about a little bit.
Well, and there was an image, and we didn't talk about it explicitly. Sarah and I have been talking about this notion of the kind of flicker. And so she showed a number of projects where there's like, we don't show one image, we show 50 images all superimposed on top of one another to try and dispel that thing that that's the one finished image, that this is something that there's a lot of range, there's a lot of possibilities built into that as a way to try and engage a client or have a conversation about that. Because I think we're moving, if we go all the way back to that first slide where the design process gets us to one finished final thing, what we're interested in is like, no, what we design is a kind of system, a number of opportunities and possibilities that have to be navigated with new constraints that come throughout the construction process even. And so how do we bake in maybe some of that dynamism or multiplicity into the process early on? And so, but yes, you're absolutely right. We talked about that with the kind of getting a finished image right at the end, but I think we live in a time, for better or worse, I'd say possibly for worse, where there does feel like this need for immediacy and this kind
Yeah.
of urgency, right? How do we graduate with an undergraduate degree and we want to be the principal, right? We
Right.
want to do everything as quickly as possible. And so I think we have to find those moments to be able to slow down the conversation with our clients and slow down those things. Maybe we can accelerate in some ways and choose those moments that we slow down and then speed up again, just as a way of managing an overall process.
That's great. Well, I want to thank you both. It was a really wonderful hour and lots of really amazing ideas. And again, I would encourage since you both offered any members with specific questions to please reach
Yes,
out, and we could make those emails available if you haven't seen them. I thank you both for your time. I will send that poster, and we will. I'm sure we'll talk soon. Thank you both.
that sounds great. Thank you for the invitation.
Yeah, and don't everyone don't forget on July 9th we have Laia, who's gonna talk a little bit about new materials in architecture. Enjoy the 4th of July. We'll see everyone later. Thank you. Ciao.
Thanks.
Ciao.